Before we get started, this video was actually a request by one of the wonderful Subscribestar friends. They actually recommended a pretty neat little gem, because I doubt I would have seen this otherwise.
Another thing that pissed me off, talking about who started punk rock music. Was it Sex Pistols in England? Was it the Ramones and the Velvet Underground in New York? It's the Ramones, it's the Sex Pistols. Who cares who started it? It's music. I don't know who started it, and I don't give a fuck. The one thing I do know is that we did it harder. Damn, we did it faster, and we definitely did it with more love, baby. Man, you're a girl, right? You'd only have sex with a guy if you had a fucking accent. Can you think of anything more ludicrous in your life? It's every asshole in Salt Lake City, and let me tell you, plenty assholes in this general region. They want to do a little of this. We'll get her drunk and put on some kind of stupid fucking accent like, hey, mistress, do you fancy a shag? There she would, fucking knees in the sky. It was sad. It made me really sad. Poor girl had no self-respect.
SLC Punk is an interesting movie. For those unaware, SLC Punk is the 1998 comedy film directed by James Maradino and starring Matthew Lillard and Michael Gorgian. The story follows a small clique of punk kids in the 1980s in Salt Lake City, Utah. From there, we see their daily rituals, how they view the world, and what made them interested in the punk movement in the first place. So if it's not obvious, this is a punk movie, which is actually more of a subgenre than you would think. For context, the punk movement started sometime in the 1970s and lasted up into the 90s. It was all about youthful rebellion, cynicism, anarchy, and intentionally violating social norms simply because you could. And this actually covered way more than just music, despite that genre being the easiest thing people point to when talking about punk. There are punk movies, comics, art. So long as it has the vibe, it will fall under the umbrella. There's a lot of debate on what exactly started the punk movement, though most agree it was sort of a retaliation to the societal conventions established by the baby boomers and the greatest generation, along with being a more aggressive offshoot of the hippie movement of the 60s, especially come the 80s, when a lot of former hippies would calm down and, ironically enough, become Reagan-style Republicans. So their children viewed their parents as sellouts and conformists, so they would double down and do whatever they could to piss off the establishment. And I do mean whatever they could to piss them off. You can find punk bands that talk about how great Marxism is, to full-blown ANCAP shit, and downright neo-Nazi punk bands, so long as you can be as outrageous as humanly possible and piss off as many people as you can. Music-wise, there's still a lot of back and forth on what exactly created punk music. The influences to the genre are clear, stuff like the Stooges and really Iggy Pop at large, along with the garage rock that was really big among youth culture at the time, which had influences of hippie music and the beginning of hard rock and heavy metal, so stuff like Alice Cooper and The Who. Most assume the Sex Pistols created the genre in the UK, which makes sense considering how popular the music became in the country and how many bands tried following the same formula. Yet, on the other hand, you have the Ramones, which was a New York band that started their career right before the Sex Pistols, so some say they were the first. Though there are those that claim that the actual title to the inventor of punk actually goes to Death. Not that Death, no. This was a proto-punk band from Detroit, Michigan that sadly never got off the ground. Funny enough, these guys never intended to be a punk band. They weren't interested in becoming a political or social movement. Instead, they just wanted to be a rock band. Hell, their father was a preacher and they made attempts at becoming a gospel band. Unfortunately, these were a bunch of brothers from Detroit at a time when Motown music was the name of the game. Plus, a bunch of black brothers coming together to make a band made agents immediately jump to the Jackson 5, for obvious reasons. The producers wanted marketable pop music, maybe something in line was soul or funk, since that made bank in the 70s, and a ton of record companies wanted that piece of the pie. Easy to sell stuff. However, Death's lineup was a lot more in line with aggressive party rock, so while the music was good, fights between the band and their potential record company ultimately caused them to die before they even got an album out. The only reason this band is even remembered is because, not even joking, one of the nephews to one of the band members found a box of their demo tapes and decided to revive the band, a full 40 years after their first attempt. It's actually a very very interesting story you guys should look into. There's a documentary called A Band Called Death, which is actually very good. It tells the story of one of music's biggest tragedies, at least how I feel. These were really underground, interesting guys that were held down simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still, you guys get the point. Punk is a fascinating period of social history. I didn't even cover guys like G.G. Allin and their infamous reputations in the music industry, but as mentioned before, punk wasn't exclusively something that affected music. It actually influenced more than a few movies as well, and it's still going to this day, at least in its own way. Some of the most famous punk movies are stuff like Return of the Living Dead and Repo Man, which are my two personal favorites of the subgenre. Also, SLC punk. SLC punk serves as a love letter to the culture, and just sort of a sad goodbye to this era, because remember, this movie came out in 1998. By this point, the punk movement wasn't just dead, it was whored out to such a hilarious degree that it wasn't anywhere close to what it started off as. What started as an attempt at self-expression and rebellion against the status quo ended up as a fashion statement, something this movie actually addresses. Punk in the 70s could cause full-blown riots at concerts. G.G. Allin in particular built his career off being as shocking and offensive as humanly possible, even breaking his parole more than once just to go on tour with his band, only to be thrown out of venues for picking fights in the audience and shitting on stage. That's not a joke. But come the 90s, so much of the genre became watered down and corporate. You went from the Sex Pistols to Rage Against the Machine, or the more accurate name, support the current thing because we're a bunch of sellout whores who were never good, but because we quote Marxist shit, dumb teenagers love us. It's not as catchy, but this isn't even mentioning the glorified pop punk, stuff like Blink-182 or Rise Against. You can like these bands as much as you want. I like The Offspring and Melancholian despite being part of the exact same wave. I'm just saying these guys were the death knell to the actual punk genre. Not so much the cause, more just the symptom. Also, I'm not going to pretend to be a diehard loyalist for the style. I appreciate it and I enjoy it, but it died before I was even born, so I mean, what's the point? And it had some aspects to it that kind of defeated its own purpose, which is once again something SLC punk actually addresses and embraces. So to actually talk about the movie itself follows a sort of day-in-the-life formula. The protagonist Steve-O, yeah, that's his name, but not that Steve-O, played by Matthew Lillard, guides the audience through the punk scene in Salt Lake City, Utah, the various subsections, how they interact with each other, and how he personally thinks of being into the culture. Meet his friends, seeing how batshit insane they are, and the different situations they wind up in due to their stupidity. And yeah, it's stupidity. The movie isn't shy about addressing the fact these are just a bunch of dumb kids. Now, SLC punk is mainly a comedy, and in that same vein, you have to go in with a very specific mindset for how the humor is handled. It can go from very over-the-top, goofy segments, where Steve-O and his friends pick fights at concerts, to freaking out a bunch of boomers at a liquor store, to more subtle gags, like having the most hardcore guy in the group be some nerdy-looking dude. Personally, I don't really find myself laughing my ass off at SLC punk. There's definitely funny scenes. The part where Steve-O is talking with his parents about going to college was pretty great, just in how hard his mom and dad were trying to hide how much they fucking hate each other. But mostly, I think it's just a really interesting look in how someone views stuff like anarchy and rebellion. I don't personally find it the greatest comedy I've ever seen, but the dialogue is really good. It's relatable in a way that genuinely feels like it's written by someone that understands these people. Hell, the director himself said that while the movie is not an autobiography, it is based off people he knew in real life, so they can come across a lot more genuine than any other corporate entity attempting the exact same story. Steve-O in particular is a good protagonist, and Matthew Lillard does a good job playing him. He actually had a pretty decent career in the 90s, appearing in stuff like this movie, 13 Ghosts, and most famously Scream. So if you thought he's familiar, it's because yeah, he's been in more than a few good things. Even if the movies themselves were just sort of meh, I mean 13 Ghosts is kind of ass, not even gonna lie, he always managed to be memorable in them. Though Scream absolutely still holds up to this day, that movie's fucking awesome. But funny enough, the first time I've ever actually seen this guy in a movie was the first live-action Scooby Doo, where he played Shaggy. So it was a culture shock going from that to something like Scream, especially if you watched both as a kid. It was kind of mind-blowing. It was pretty great.
Hello?
Oh, Stu. What's your motive? Billy's got one. The police are on their way. What are you gonna tell them?
Peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive.
I'm gonna rip you up, you bitch! Just like your fucking mother!
You gotta find me first, you pansy-ass mama's boy!
Fuck! Fucking hit me with the phone, dick!
Still, he has a lot of fun playing Steve-O in this. He puts a lot of energy into the role, and he fits the vibe of a wannabe rebel kid. Some of his monologues are great, just because he puts a lot of oomph into the delivery. The mall scene in particular was a lot of fun. It's probably the highlight to the movie for me. His buddy, Heroin Bob, played by Michael Gorgian, is also pretty great, but he's less goofy and charismatic and more of a paranoid wild card. That's not to say he was bad, it's just different from the everyman style that Steve-O is meant to be. He's paranoid about medicine, needles, and really all sorts of stuff, which ends up being pretty ironic by the end, but no spoilers. Bob isn't a complete lunatic, and in fact, a lot of his fears actually make a lot of sense, even considering his upbringing, just that he's flighty and he freaks out if he feels slighted. I would say that the movie focuses on their friendship and their bond, and there are definitely more than a few parts where that is the case, but it's more accurate to call SLC Punk an ensemble movie. There are a lot of small stories, almost vignettes, that focus on various characters and people that Steve-O and Bob know and run into. You have a guy who fried his brain after accidentally taking over 100 doses of acid all at once, a paranoid European rich kid who sells everybody weed, the girl who fucks anything that moves. You get the idea. The characters can be hit and miss. Some of them are really funny and really charming, others are just sort of there. Not gonna lie, I never really cared for the girlfriend, she was just kind of there. Not horrible, but also just not very memorable. And this sort of leans into the main issue I have with SLC Punk. The structure is a little wonky. Not so much that it's bad, but it definitely can meander in the middle. It feels like it's just a little bit too long for what it's trying to do, and it doesn't really do anything that keeps you engaged. First and final act are great and really charming. I fully understand why this is a cult classic among people, but personally the middle sort of drags. It's not bad, you can clearly see what it's shooting for, but it takes a bit too long to get to a conclusion you reached way earlier. To be clear, the main theme of SLC Punk is coming of age, understanding that you went through a phase and can't keep doing something forever. Steve-O, while being extremely knowledgeable and loyal to the punk scene, has a crisis of faith. While he loves the culture and the music, he sees the impact the actual punk lifestyle has on those around him, the drug addiction, the lack of fulfillment, and just realizing his friends are growing older and drifting apart. Some of it can lean a little too hard into, let's be perfectly honest here, almost being an after-school special, as in he literally stumbles into one of his friends on the street who's now a homeless, mentally ill drug addict. Now, in all fairness, that is something that does happen to people, and addressing it doesn't immediately make something preachy, just that personally it dipped a little too hard into do you get it territory for me, because by this point Steve-O is already deep into his crisis, and this is treated as sort of one of the final nails in the coffin. Personally, I love the scene where he was talking with the girl at the party, the one who outright tells him that punk has become a fashion statement, and any idea of rebellion is just ironically conforming to the larger whims of the group. It was actually a clever takedown that didn't feel like it came from a place of contempt. Instead, she simply said it like it was. And funny enough, it makes you think back on a lot of how Steve-O described punk culture and the certain factions, what he called tribes, and really view them in a new lens. This movement that was supposed to be about social rebellion and individualism and absolute freedom had its own factions. It had different subcultures, as in different things people had to prescribe to in their beliefs in order to fit in, which is kind of ironic. I mean, it's just human nature. You can't have anarchy because people will eventually just naturally lean into groups. We're social animals. But it is funny to think about, because remember, by the time the movie came out, this was 100% what punk turned into. What started off as a movement to promote free thinking and self-expression turned into another subculture full of its own standards and pressure to conform. As much as Steve-O wants to yell at his parents for supposedly selling out, he's just as much of a sellout, just in his own way. It's actually a really clever look. This is about as much as I really want to say about SLC Punk plot-wise. It's a clever look into a phenomenon that most people know about but aren't completely aware of. Now, as stated, it's not my personal favorite punk movie. That title still belongs to Repo Man, because that movie's just fucking great.
Oh. Yeah, I'm here, man. The lights are growing dim. I know a life of crime led me to this sorry fate. And yet, I blame society. Society made me what I am.
That's bullshit. You're a white suburban punk, just like me.
But it still hurts.
You're gonna be all right, man. Maybe not.
But I won't deny that SLC Punk is up there for me, flaws and all. Now, the actual film work is pretty basic. It never really tries anything creative or out there with the filmmaking. Sure, you have a lot of back and forth between present day and flashbacks, but I don't know, there's nothing inventive or out there that will make you really remember what they did with the camera. Even in scenes where characters do drugs, it doesn't really try anything crazy. It just sort of, I don't know, holds on a guy while he's high. Now, the editing is pretty energetic. As stated, you'll see a lot of jumping between the present, and a flashback. There are moments where Steve-O will directly talk to the camera and address the audience in sort of a fourth wall break. It never gets super crazy, but it has those little moments that you might appreciate. And it does make sense because of the subject matter. Punk is all about intentionally breaking the rules. But don't expect any real sequence that messes with your head. It's telling a grounded story about eccentric weirdos. The soundtrack is pretty great though, which makes sense considering it's all about a subculture revolving around music. You got the Stooges, Adam Ant, The Exploited. It's got more than a few bangers in it. Lord knows I was looking up songs left and right as the movie was going. Now, this isn't just a comedy. It also has some dramatic scenes to it, and whether or not those land comes down to how much you enjoy the characters. Are you invested enough to give a shit when something bad happens? That's up to you. As stated, the characters were kinda hit and miss with me. With it being a decent sized ensemble, it was kinda hard to balance out everyone getting enough screen time for you to like them. And not gonna lie, some of the dramatic moments kinda fell pretty flat for me, at least in the sense of really giving a shit. Still, this is a movie I enjoyed quite a bit actually. You can find it on Amazon and I think a few other places. So if this seems like right up your alley, then definitely take the time to sit down and give it a watch. I definitely enjoyed it. And if you're a big fan of punk music, this is probably something that you have to put down on your list. I have no idea how the larger punk community how chills down my spine saying that actually feels about SLC punk. I don't know. Still, you guys might enjoy it quite a bit. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys.
I didn't sell out, son. I bought in. Keep that in mind. That kid is gonna make one hell of a lawyer, huh?
Yeah, he takes after his father. He's a son of a bitch.
Fuck you, dear.
The sparkle of champagne, crime it's time to worry again. A life summary if you was really right. Jane Fonda on the screen today, convince the liberals it's okay. So let's get festive and celebrate. Oh, they kill, 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 kill the poor. Kill, 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 kill the poor. Kill, 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 kill the poor tonight. Kill, 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 kill the poor. Kill, 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 kill the poor. Kill, 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 kill the poor tonight. Kill, 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 kill the poor. Kill, 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 kill the poor. Kill, 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 kill the poor tonight. Aye, aye.
Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're gonna plant crack in your house, and they're gonna arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.